incense going.
Incense?
I mean, it's not really incense. It's just like wood. It doesn't burn as long. It just smells like woody. Nice. I tend to like that better than incense. You kind of probably know that by now.
Yeah. I hate the smell of incense, quite honestly.
I don't mind it, but on a regular basis, I would prefer, like, just this shit, which I guess, like, hippies really like. Just, like, some Palo Santo. Just smells good. Just smells like a fire.
Yeah.
Like a campfire.
The thing I don't like. Yeah, that's the thing I don't like about incense is that it smells like that patchouli head shop.
Yeah.
Like.
Or, like, I mean, you smelled what, like, sage smells like. Burning that in my apartment.
Yeah, like a Wiccan.
Like a regular Twilight reader.
Yeah. No, it always surprises me, like, the number of people that, like, just, like, burn sage to, like, cleanse rooms and shit.
You never know.
Burning the sage.
Grew up with a lot of ghost-fearing Christians. Like, I think all my friends believed in ghosts to some degree, and their families did too.
Do you believe in ghosts?
How often do you think ghost story writers actually believe in ghosts?
Edith Wharton, as listeners will know, one of my favorite writers. She has a great quote that people often reference, which is, I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm still frightened by them. Like, yeah. It's a frightening idea.
I get it. I mean, it makes sense, you know? Just like, have you ever been sleep deprived enough to, like, start seeing shit? And you're like, I know this thing's not real, but it terrifies me that, like, I'm seeing this figure out of the corner of my eye. I know it's just because I haven't slept.
I've gone on, you know, where we grew up, there's a lot of old, like, colonial houses and stuff, and I've had stories of people that claim that their house is haunted, like, by just straight friends, right? Like, firsthand recountings of,
yeah, me too.
That.
That's what
and
I
then
mean. I feel like we all
Yeah.
grew up with friends whose families believed their houses were haunted. And, like, not just my friends, like, their families too.
Yeah, and then I've been on, like, ghost walks, because we grew up, listeners that are from the mid-Atlantic area will know that it's ripe with, like, Civil War battlefields and kind of Revolutionary War battlefields, and there's, like, all kinds of ghost walks and shit you can go on and, like, take, and I've been on a few of those at, like, around Gettysburg and stuff. Didn't see anything, but there is that thing where, like, because you're a little on edge, like, walking through the dark in this, like, abandoned field, essentially, that is, like, and, like, you're in a group, like, it's, like, a group of 25 people, like, a tour guide taking you through the battlefields of, like, Gettysburg at night, because, you know, you go there during the day, but at night you want to do, like, one of these ghost tours if you're ever staying in and around, you know, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, even parts of Tennessee, right? Well, you don't feel at ease, but then the tour guide kept doing shit, like, the whole time, where, like, he'd be giving us, like, a spiel about the battle and, like, what happened here in these fields that we're standing in, and then he'd stop and, like, look behind us and be like, oh my god, and then everybody would, like, turn, like, we'd be like, oh fuck, I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm fucking terrified that they might be real. Dude. That's, like, the whole thing, right? That's the whole appeal. And really, it's great.
Sorry, I have to readjust my mic because Bill, I told you, not Bill, my husband had to rearrange my desk a little bit. I don't know why he rearranged it the way he did, because he's a lefty, and honestly, I would think that this setup makes that worse, but I don't know.
Huh, I never knew he was left-handed.
Yeah, fucking freak.
Yeah, dude, fucking freaks. Left-handed freaks, dude.
He's a monster.
Monster, yeah, dude, fucking ghost. Fucking ghost.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Alright. This is Heavy Board. I'm Andrew Wistad.
Fucking, I'm just chunky, man. I'm feeling kind of fat.
And today we're doing Nick Flynn's The Captain Asks for a Show of Hands. Rundown. This book was originally published in 2011 by Grey Wolf. Probably the best kind of small independent press in existence right now.
It's one that you automatically,
might have
like,
arguments with
whenever you
that.
pick up one of their books, you automatically recognize that, like, you go, oh, this is from Grey Wolf. Like, when I saw this book, I was like, this is from Grey
Yeah.
Wolf, isn't it? I don't know if it's just their design.
The
Yeah,
design.
it's something.
Yeah.
I don't know. You just know. Maybe it's that. Do they have this, like, red binding a lot? I don't know. Something about their books, yeah.
Well, no, but
stands out.
I don't know what it is, but Grey Wolf, I've heard they have really great they have a great publicist. They have pretty good book design too. Like, they have better book designs, I would say, consistently than most big presses do. I mean, we don't have to get into book design right now, or we could. Book, like what the book jackets look like.
That shit's hit or miss. Yeah.
It's hit or miss, but there's been a trend recently where it's just kind of like a lot of neon colors and shapes and shit on every fucking book cover, and like fruit or whatever. It's just like fruit, and the book will be called something like "I burn here" or whatever, and it's like pictures of like fruit or something like on the
it
cover,
sounds
like
sexy.
a pastel. Yeah, I guess it was very in. It's
eye-catching.
hopefully it's starting to fade out, but yeah. Yeah, but when every book on the shelf looks like that, it is not so eye-catching. You know what I mean? Like when you go through like the bookshelves and you're just seeing like the same book cover on everything. But this has a pretty good book cover because they have a pretty good art department there at Grey Wolf. So Grey Wolf is good. They publish a lot of... Really, Grey Wolf publishes some of the most interesting poets right now. Like, they really have a good poetry editor over there. And they publish a lot of the better poetry, or the better poets that, or I would say are the better poets of contemporary
Do they do
writers.
fiction and shit?
Yeah, they do fiction, but again, it's usually smaller stuff because they're a smaller press, but they do like kind of artsy literary books. They don't really do any of the big money making pop style books or anything like that. But yeah, originally published in 2011.
Was it his third book?
Yeah, I think this was his third book of poetry
Yeah.
overall. He's most famous for his memoirs. The most famous one being Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, which was like Nick Flynn's first big like claim to fame, and at least what made him a lot of money and granted him like the freedom to start doing all this other stuff. But yeah. And we have the same version of this.
I'm assuming. I don't know.
Yeah. I assume we do. Yeah, same version. I think it's the only version that exists. I mean, this is a poetry book, man. Not like there's a whole lot of different versions and printings of poetry books unless they're like hundreds of years old or something. Okay, so we have the same cover. We have the same edition. We have the same book. Got covered all that. Page numbers will match up. It'll be linked in the description as always. Get yourself a copy, listeners. This is one you probably don't want to miss. You'll hear us talk about it. Well, let's do housekeeping quickly before I forget. Listeners, we are still looking for workshop horror stories. If you have a workshop horror story, send it to us at heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. For those that don't know, we also have a subscription plan. You can go to patreon.com/heavyboard and subscribe to this podcast to support us. We have a couple different tiers. We try to make them affordable for everyone. So go subscribe. That helps us out. If you can't afford that, don't want to, there are other ways to support us. You can like, share, subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you enjoy your podcasts on. Leave us a 5-star review, share with friends and family, etc. All of that helps us out. So if you enjoy it, give us a like, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, click, and we'll be here. We'll be here. And that's it for housekeeping. I feel like I always have to remind, like, you have to, like, constantly market ourselves. Like, remind people that, like, we exist.
Yeah, that's the worst.
Everybody hates doing it, and it is awkward at first, but now that I've been doing it a few times, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Like, yeah, please support. Please support us. Please. We have no money, no prospects. All we have are some books.
And some toilet paper.
And some TP. Sometimes used as bookmarks. Some toilet paper
Yeah,
bookmarks.
do you?
No, but if we ever got big enough, we should make those. In our merch shop. We sell them in a merch shop. Toilet paper bookmarks.
Fucking merch.
You can wipe and or mark your place.
Mark your place. That's all it needs to say.
Yeah. Keep your place clean. Keep the pages clean. All right, initial thoughts. What did you think, Soph?
Started very positive, as you know. Sort of flamed out. Just the flame was strong, and then it kind of died at the end. I really liked about 50% of it.
Is this the first Nick Flynn you've read?
No. But it's the first Nick Flynn I've read in a really long time.
Yeah.
Like, I think if I went back and reread his first book, which is the only one I'm familiar with, which is Some Ether, I think I would have...
It was a big debut.
Yeah, I think I would be surprised by a lot of it. Like, I don't remember most of it. I remember liking it.
Yeah, Some Ether is good, listeners, if you're curious. Some Ether is good. I am biased because I like Nick Flynn. I think I own all his poetry books, at least. I'm a fan. I think he's, well, I have like a few things that I'll nitpick, as you guys will hear in this podcast here, because, everybody has their preferences. I think he's one of the most original and kind of daring.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he's really playful. I think he's risky, and I like that. I think that's exciting. I think that's fun. I think he cares a lot about sound, which I care a lot about. So I'm always going to be biased toward those writers. I liked a lot of this book, but yeah, there were also things about it that fell short for me.
Yeah, and you're never going to please everybody all the time type thing, but I've similar in terms, it does peter out a little bit, like in terms of around the second section of the book, you start to get a little bit petering. At least the intensity of the first half starts to wane a little bit by then.
Fuck is that word,
Falling limp. Your Peter's a little limp there.
That's what it sounds like. Peter. It's petering. Peter.
Peener. Oh yeah. This is a peener podcast. Petering podcast. Petering podcast falling off. But yeah, I think he's one of the most original and daring contemporary poets that we have in America right here. Listeners will know I really don't keep up with any kind of contemporary stuff. I'm of the Mary Oliver persuasion that tells everyone that if you try to keep up with contemporary literature and poetry, you're just going to drive yourself crazy. Just enjoy what you enjoy and constantly be seeking it out, kind of thing. Like, you don't need to be keeping up with every release, every writer coming out with a new book. But sometimes people like that, so if you like it, keep doing it. But if not, don't worry about it. You just got to keep seeking it out. And this is his third book of poems, as we said. He writes basically a book of poems every 5 to 10 years. all of which are wildly original. So I own all 3 of his books that he's put out here of poetry, and they're all worth buying and reading and
Is
contemplating.
this the last one he put out?
I think so, unless he put out one more recently where I wasn't paying attention, like I just said, to like the contemporary releases. I think this is his most recent book of poetry. But he has put out, memoirs since this. He think he's put out like two more memoirs since then.
Yeah, I know he's put out.
I've never read the memoirs, but that's really what made him his big claim to literary fame. As famous as literary people get now, which isn't very, right? But enough that if you probably like books, like poetry, you know who Nick Flynn is. You follow it. Are you looking it up?
Yeah. Let's see. What do we have?
Was My Feelings the most recent one?
That's 2015.
2015. Yeah, okay,
I Will
so this is the
Destroy
third
You,
book he's had.
2019.
Poems?
Poems.
Okay, so I haven't read the most recent book of poems then. Yeah, My Feelings is good. I forgot about that entirely.
Yeah,
but
so that would have been after this book.
yeah, My Feelings is
I
good.
guess-
Yeah, it's good.
Oh, yeah. Something came out last year. A memoir. Okay.
Yeah, he likes to put memoirs in between every poetry book kind of thing. Which, as a writer, you get bored, right? You want to change it up some. But my favorite that I've read, Blind Huber, dude. Blind Huber is such an underrated
His
book.
second collection of poems.
Yeah, his second book is such an underrated book. He gets really creative with the themes, as you'll hear us go into today. Like, I just can't praise Nick Flynn enough in terms of what my taste, what he does for me, the spots he hits. Really hits my sweet spot when I read a lot of his books. And then his craft is, well, at times I'll nitpick it. You'll hear me do some today. Like, it's usually, I can usually at least see what he's trying to do, even if I think it failed or didn't succeed in some way. I can usually see, what he's trying to do. And we'll talk about line breaks in this book as we get to some poems here. But all right, that's my spiel. I love Nick Flynn. I like this book. You should pick up a copy. All that good shit. Where did you want to start?
I mean, do you want to talk about the epigraph?
Yeah, always. Start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. So the quote to start the book, a spokesman can only state his purpose, that it doesn't happen more often.
His surprise. Spokesman can only state his surprise that it doesn't happen more often.
Oh, right. A spokesman can only state his surprise that it doesn't happen more often. What do we think?
I think it's interesting that he chooses to quote himself. Pretty bold. This is a quote
What's it
from
from?
Some Ether. It's from
Some
his
Ether,
first
right.
book.
Yeah, I guess that's what people say about Flynn, is that he's a little egotistical, right? In terms of
Well,
stuff
it's
like
just
that.
like, it's interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. It's definitely
but,
bold. It's risky.
It's quite frankly, I don't think there's enough of the kind of like egotistical kind of poets out there. I don't think there's enough.
There are. They're just pretending otherwise.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. They hide it, where he's much more unashamed of of it. We did John Keats. Check that out, listeners. Episode 6. He was, we talked about Keats kind of having this kind of thinking he was the best thing that ever lived, right? Like, there's just this level of confidence that, one, to just write, period, is required, but two, when you have like this kind of, some would say even, undeserved or too much or egotistical or an annoying amount of confidence. But that's required, man. Like, if you're going to start trying to like do bold, creative things, I mean, you better fucking believe in yourself, or it's not going to work out. So I appreciate that. Do we know what poem it's taken from?
Is it from... Hang on. Unless it's from... Is it from this book? Every day something. This time a French ship with all her passengers and crew slides into the North Sea. The water's so cold, it finishes them. Nothing saved but a life ring stenciled grace, cut loose from its body. The spokesman can only state his surprise that it doesn't happen more often. Now I'm looking. It's not from the first book. I mean, it's not from the first section. It's got to be from some ether.
Can't Google it?
I did. I got some fairly... Yeah, okay. The title as well as the epigraph. A spokesperson can only state his... Oh, okay. I think the captain asks for a show of hands is a poem in some ether. That's why I was getting confused. I got it.
Okay.
So the title of this book is also taken from his first book.
What do we think of the title?
I like it.
Oh yeah, it's fucking
I
great
think it's
for
a great
poetry
title.
book. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I'm not going to be nitpicky about it. I think it does a good job of holding those pieces together, and we'll talk about this, but in the poems that most refer to the title, that have a sort of refrain of talking to the captain, right, or addressing the captain. I think it works well with those.
He did that in Blind Huber too, where there's like a captain or like a sir or like a person that keeps being referred to in the poems, and that's just kind of a quirk that Nick Flynn likes to do, and I think it usually works pretty fucking well.
Yeah, I mean it's
when he does
it's something we see in Berryman too.
Berryman, oh yeah. As we've said before, right, listeners, if you haven't figured it out, this is a Berryman pod. No doubt Flynn was read Berryman. All that good stuff. I guess we didn't really introduce Flynn to people. Shit. Not like anybody gives a fuck, I guess. At this point, he's the author of 3 memoirs. Most famous one was Another Bullshit Night in Suck City. That's what got him a Big Pen Martha Albrand Award.
Flynn?
Yeah. And that was turned into a movie called Bean Flynn with De Niro and Paul Dano. It was pretty good, actually. A little indie movie.
Really? I'm surprised that was good. I always end up hating movies about... Damn.
It's a little like... It's about him, so it's a little like... And it's indie, so there's like very like emotional kind of like, look at what a piece of shit I am scenes.
Split into 3 sections, right?
Yeah, but he's written a bunch of books. He's got a lot of accolades to his name. He teaches at University of Houston, but only in the springs, which is fucking weird. And then he spends the rest of his year in Brooklyn and elsewhere, is what he says. So, does he still teach at Houston?
I don't fucking know.
I don't know either, because I know he was kind of under fire during the Me Too craze.
Oh, was he?
Oh yeah, dude. Oh yeah, him and Juno Diaz got caught up in the Me Too thing. So I don't know if they took him off that or not.
Yeah, it's possible.
I mean, both him and like it was not.
I mean, they're both writers that were already successful enough that I think they were gonna. I mean, not to be a dick. I think they were gonna survive that no matter what.
Yeah, well, the reason I say him and Diaz together is because they were, both of their accusations that they got during that kind of craze was like, they were a little like it was consensual sex, but then it was like after kind of thing, that like there was like some like expectation that if you have sex with a famous writer, they're supposed to give you a book contract or something. And that was like the main complaint.
So it wasn't like students?
It was students.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think.
Well, yeah, that's always an iffy territory.
Right. Same category as what's her name? That Iowa lady. Joyce.
Jory Graham?
Jory Graham, yeah, Jory Graham.
Yeah.
She liked to fuck students, right?
Yeah. I thought she was like famous for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And she's still good looking too, yeah, Jory Graham. Even in her 60s here. But anyway, we're off topic, way off topic. Where do you want to start with this?
Yeah, I mean, Well, wherever you do. Like I said, I only had time to give it one read. I hate only giving it one read. I don't think, I typically just don't think that's enough for any book of poems. That's just me. Or any one poem. I don't think it's enough to read it just once. Some of them I did read twice. I really liked the first poem.
Haiku.
I always
failed.
depend on the first poem as sort of helping me understand how to read the rest of the book. So I tend to come back to that. I liked this one. What did you think about it?
I liked it. I think my favorite poems in this were Fire, that first kind of
Yeah,
long,
I would
spaced
agree.
out one. That, and there's a couple, he has like one called Fire, Earth,
Yeah, he has
Air,
all of the elements. Like he has elemental
water.
poems.
And those kind of they do help to frame the book a little because they're written in the similar style, and those are the ones that specifically reference the captain as they're spaced out in the pages of the book, and it does work structurally. It works in kind of a cool little follow through way. But Fire is probably my favorite of
Yeah,
those.
I agree. I think it works the best
and,
too.
Yeah, and the best done. But yeah, so my favorites were Fire and then that Imagination.
Yeah, those were the two big ones that I marked, and I also just thought that this first section was by far the strongest of the three, by a
Yeah.
long shot. And I still am a big believer. Maybe you learn this in a workshop or just like from reading books, but you always want the last two poems of the collection to be bangers. You want to go out strong, super memorable. You want to kind of put your bullshit in the middle, maybe have a really strong one right in the middle, like
Yeah,
just
right before it peters into the big
Yeah.
strong.
Yeah, dude, you want it to be your first couple
bang at
poems,
the
your
end.
last couple of poems, and maybe one in the middle. And let your shitty poems be the other ones. This one, I feel like they were all up front. All of the bangers were up front.
Yeah, and writers know, right? Like when you're writing stuff, like there's like when you put a book together, right? Like there's like some themes, some fit the theme, and some don't quite fit the theme, type thing. And then you can, critics or whatever podcasts like ours will make their their judgments about it. But
I think you can also get so deep into something that the longer you spend in it, like in a project when you're writing it, the further removed you can get from your audience and being like, okay, does this poem work on its own, or like am I just too deep in my own head right now? And just sort
Right.
of writing something that makes sense in the world of these poems, but if this poem sat on its own, would it make sense? I think that this book maybe falls prey to that a little bit. And we can talk about that. And I think that's true of any I think that can be true of like anyone who works with this sort of
very specific theme in
collage
this
kind
book.
of style, right? But like he uses a lot of collage or like pastiche.
Yeah.
He pulls from a lot of sources. He uses a lot of fragments.
A lot of song lyrics that get pulled in.
Yeah, he uses a lot of pop culture, which doesn't, I have no qualms with that.
Oh, I love
Yeah, I
pop
think
culture
I think
references
it's
if they're done
used
well. Yeah.
For really good reason here. I have some thoughts about that, but we'll get there.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I like listeners might not. I don't think I've ever said this on the pod, but like it's not secret. My one of my favorite poems ever is "Lana Turner Has Collapsed" by Frank O'Hara. I'm a huge Frank O'Hara stan, and I remember sharing that with my students and being like, "Oh, this is so cool!" Like the way he uses the pop culture references with like Lana Turner, and I shared it like in a poetry class I was teaching my students. Like, who's Lana Turner? I was like, fuck. Like, I guess it doesn't work as well if you don't know what the fuck. If you don't know any history at all. If you don't know any.
Yeah.
He could have said Judy Garland and they wouldn't have fucking known. So it doesn't matter. But yeah, I like that. I like pop culture references when it's used well, and can be more timeless. But yeah, you want to talk about this first one?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about what it may be, some of the themes that it sets up before we get into the first captain poem.
Yeah, and he's listeners, if you haven't read this or you're not looking at the page, like his style is very important because of the way he structures this. So in this one, it's kind of a prose poem, even though it's called haiku.
Yeah.
Haiku in parentheses failed, right? A failed haiku. But if he uses basically backslashes to, I would assume, represent line breaks.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting way to use in a prose poem. So you kind of use line breaks without them existing. It's a really, he's not the first person to do this. He won't be the last, but he does it well. So
Yeah, it also,
there are line breaks.
It makes you read it a little bit faster, right? It takes some of that breathiness away.
Well, I would say, yeah, I mean, definitely. But I would say it implies the slowdown without putting it on the page.
Yeah,
like
but
a
there's
symbol
also not as
standing
much
in.
of it because your eye literally doesn't have to move as much.
Right.
But yeah, the first line, the thin thread that holds us here, tethered, or maybe tied together. What do you call it? Telephone, horizon, song? So already the things that sort of come up, telephone, horizon, song.
And think of those like three things compared, right? Telephone, horizon, song. Like they're not naturally like things that go together, but like this is kind of the brilliance of Nick Flynn is he forces these things together, right? Forces you to contemplate these three things together, right?
Yeah, so we also like get a sense that there's like a way of talking about, what puts us in contact with one another, right? How we're connected, how we're internally or externally connected, right? Listen to yourself sing. We are all God's children. We are all gods. We walk the earth sometimes. Two sails inside us sometimes. So this is where we start to get, a theme of ships, which carries throughout this whole book. Really important. Until one day, for no reason, it sails. Hello, damn phone. So he has these interruptions, too, that I found really interesting.
And the interruptions usually call back to something already existing, either in the book or in the poem
Right.
itself. So again, just more praise for Flynn in terms of what I would say is his ability, talent, I don't want to say genius, but creativity, all that, being able to make that work. The interruptions work really well.
Yeah.
And they call back to things we previously read, if not in the actual poem itself, like a previous poem in the collection or something. It's quite good.
Yeah, it was really, basically he positions, he sort of identifies the thing that we are inside of us. Like, he sort of separates body from self, I guess, here. Our body's the bottle, a ship inside each, until one day, for no reason, it sails. Hello, damn phone. Until one day it sails out of sight, until one day it cuts out of earshot. Bye-bye, muttered into your cupped palm. Bye-bye, boat. Bye-bye, rain. Look. Maybe this is the place we've been waiting for. Maybe this place is the day inside us. This is one of the ones that I had to read a few times. I always recommend doing that for the first poem of any collection, right? Because again, I think it does kind of lay out a lot of the important themes. It kind of instructs you on how to read the rest of the book. Reminded me a little bit of Robert Haas.
I've never read Haas.
Just of this one poem, of his most, one of his most famous poems.
I think we brought up Haas before on this
Yeah.
podcast, and I've never read him, but
Yeah, he says something about like the body as a day, the poem as a day. I don't remember, something like that. One of those. It's in one of his most famous poems, but either way. And it wasn't anything about the style that reminded me of him. It was about his choice of imagery. But yeah, I thought it was, interesting the way he set up the internal and external, the body and sort of the internal self. I think it sets up a lot of, the conflict that he discusses later. And then he ends with that, is it still your heart? Is it welling? That comes back. And I loved that repetition there.
Yeah, sometimes it's overkill, like one too many repetitions,
Yeah.
but in a lot of places, he really nails that repetition. And I think we just talked about this on the last poetry we did, right? With Chris Lee's book.
Heather Crystal.
Yeah,
Oh, Chris Lee.
Crystal's.
Whatever.
Chris Lee. I still say it wrong.
I mean, we don't
Damn.
know. We didn't look up. We didn't look it up.
Never will.
But yeah, it's definitely one of those books where, like, you know what it's about, but you can't nail down every individual poem. And at times I do find that frustrating. There are things that I want to be able to nail down.
Well, I'll say yes. I agree with that
I
entirely.
don't find that to be an issue with this first poem. I would say this poem doesn't want to be super nailed down, but it does all the things it needs to do to give me enough meaning to feel like I enjoyed it and I'm getting something from it.
And he doesn't do this so much in his first book, Some Ether, or his fourth book, My Feelings. But he does do it in Blind Huber in this one, whereas everything Sophie said I agree with, but I think the reason it works better in the collection like that, he grounds it through the themes. So even if we don't make sense of this, it's still grounded in the themes of the Captain Asks for a Show of Hands kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like he almost, I don't know if he does this, I've never fucking met the guy, like I've never spoken to him at a conference or anything. I have friends who have, gone to readings and gotten book signings and chatted with him a little bit. Apparently, he's a pretty down to earth guy, pretty friendly to fans and stuff, and will talk to you if you go up to him at the conference or something. But so I've heard, I don't know from experience, but yeah, I think it just, I don't know if he creates these rules for himself, like to keep everything structured, because we talked about this a little bit, on the Crystal episode, where the grounding that we were longing for in that book. Flynn does a great job of giving us that through the themes, like staying so strict to these kind of themes. Like they're
It's
not like
themes
even
and
strict
images,
rules,
right?
but
Like
yeah,
calling back to them
those
and building that meaning
right.
over time.
And that allows you to have a little bit more freedom.
Yeah, I think
with
that's something
this kind
that we
of not
saw.
making sense. Yeah, with this kind of playing around, and like he's very good at that. Hence why his books are such a thrill to read. They're usually tied around a larger theme or a big character like this, like a captain like character that keeps coming back. And that's a distinct difference I just wanted to touch on. But yeah.
Yeah,
I
and there are a
agree
lot
with
of
everything you
authors
said.
that do this really, really well, right? We've seen this. I think I've seen this with Charles Simic.
Simic, yeah.
I'd say I've seen this with Sabrina Oramark.
Yeah, she doesn't write much poetry anymore, does she? But
She hasn't in a while.
she's on that fiction train,
Yeah.
man. She's trying to get that money.
But yeah, I think this book does that well. Now, the thing that I want to talk about, I really enjoy the next poem, second poem in the book, Fire.
that's
It
one of my
uses a
favorites, too.
lot of white space, right? So it's broken into
Yes.
sections that are really short, and each one is on its own page. Some
Let's
at the
talk
bottom
about
of
the white
page,
space.
some at the top of the page. It goes sort of up and down sometimes, not always.
Let's talk about the white space, because I do want to talk about that, because it's a technique. I think it's a technique that can be misused, and technique that can be used to its fullest potential. I think he kind of uses it to its fullest potential here with the way these are structured. But I mean, what do you think?
I think it works here. Well. I didn't have any long meditations about, like, why is this here? Why did you put
Yeah,
this
that's
at
not
the bottom of the page and not the top of the page?
And that's not required, listeners, to have an opinion. Yeah, like,
Yeah, I
just
have no real meditation
passing
on that.
thoughts
I do
count,
think,
yeah.
I mean, we don't know yet. If you're just, like, reading this book in passing, right? If you haven't read the back of the book, if you haven't, like, done any research before reading this book, and I don't necessarily expect anyone to.
I say it's good to just go in without all that
Right.
shit. Just you first read, just being like, let it wash over you, and then if you want to go back and do more, like Sophie said, research. What is this saying? Then you go back and do that. Right?
I had read at least the back of the book. I had.
Oh, you read it prior?
Yeah. Because I was like, okay, this is the book we're reading. What am I getting into?
Right. I have read this book before, but it was years ago when I was in grad school. So probably like 6 years ago that I first picked this book up.
Yeah, I think I knew that this was going to be connected to the War on Terror before.
See, I didn't know that.
So, yeah, I actually don't remember when I found that out. I probably read it when I like ordered it.
Right. Is that on the back of the book at all?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you read the back, like kind of description of the book, which really it's rare that a poetry book has a description on the back of what's inside it, kind of thing. You know, like a plot summary or something that you would see on a fiction book.
Yeah.
Pretty rare that you have that for a poetry book. You know.
So I think without that knowledge and without having a notes section, right? He does have a notes section in the back, which I didn't notice at first. So you can always check. You can always check the back.
He's even,
of the book, but
he's even playful with his notes sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I think he's
Yeah, he
playful
is.
in the way that those are written, all that kind of stuff.
and that's fun. Sometimes I
little
wonder
refreshing.
in these
Yeah.
cases if in every case, I think it's good to have those notes. I wondered at times if references were being used to their fullest potential, or like if something was clear enough in the poem without needing the notes to tell me what the poem was about or what it was taken from. And I definitely think that there were cases where I needed notes to tell me what the fuck I was reading and would
Yeah,
not have
I think
otherwise
that's-
known. And I think that for me is where I wanted a little bit more from some of these poems. And, you know, again, Nick Flynn doesn't owe me shit. Like, I enjoyed the fuck out of reading this book. I was totally happy to do it. But, yeah, there were places where I was just like, I would have no fucking idea if I wasn't reading these notes. And even then, I'm like, can this poem stand on its own? But again, I think... So I wanted to ask you with this first poem, right? It's how many pages?
Fire, you're talking about?
And again, when I
don't
say
know.
this, I mean short pages. Like
It goes from page 8 to page 19, or so.
so about 10
in the
10
book.
or 11.
Yeah.
I think, and there are things that I'm noticing now that are standing out more now that like I know exactly what these poems are referring to. And I think if I had been an adult, you know, when all of this shit was happening with the War on Terror, because we're thinking back this book came out 2011, so 10 years after 9/11, right?
Yeah,
lot
and
of
I guess
shit
the
had
real
happened.
the bombshell drops about Gitmo and
Yeah.
the other prisons throughout the world,
Yeah.
which are basically torture camps. Like those dropped like the end of Bush's second term, I think. I can't remember exactly because I was in high school and didn't really give a shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I wasn't paying attention to world events, but I think the big bombshells of that and like Dick Cheney and all like that all dropped like kind of the end of Bush's second term, and that kind of what made him lose a big approval rating kind of stuff. But
So we have these poems that are specifically about what we refer to as the torture memos.
Yeah, and
I had to look
I-
these up. I didn't do a lot of research on them. I don't think you need to do much research to understand what Flynn is writing about. Like, I don't think you need to go and read all of the torture memos to be able to grasp this. And as you read them, you'll read them again. The second section, or the second little piece of this poem, to be clear, with the body, and that's separated here by a colon, right? To be clear, colon, with the body. Captain, we can do as we wish. We can do as we wish with the body, but we cannot leave marks. Captain, I'm trying to get this right. And I'm like now reading this again, I'm kind of understanding it more about some of the justifications that were made in these memos, right? Like, you can do this to, you know, it's okay to do this to torture people, but it's not okay to, you know, basically kill them, right? Is a lot of what these were saying. Again, didn't read them. Did a little bit of research before the pod.
Well, this one specifically isn't necessarily pulling from, at least not in the notes, like pulling from the transcripts of the
Right.
hearings, but he said it's pulling from a lot of other poems
Mm-hmm.
and then song lyrics from Springsteen, Britney Spears, Metallica, and a bunch of other ones. And he says whose music was used, again, without permission to torture prisoners.
Yeah, not equally than elsewhere.
And then he said there's like an association that was pressing the U.S. military for royalty payments because they were using Metallica songs to torture people. What was Christopher Hitchens when he volunteered to be waterboarded? This was around that time, right? So Hitch died in 2011. I think Hitch died in 2011, 2010. I'm a big Christopher Hitchens fan, so I should know this more than I did, but I think it was like 2007, 2006 when he famously like was for like, you know, basically like Gonzo style journalism, like had himself waterboarded and then like wrote about it. So like when nonfiction writers run out of ideas, volunteer for waterboarding. All right, so should we let's just read this. Let's read this and then we'll so people know what the fuck we're talking about when we reference this. Fire. More the idea of the flame than the flame, as in the flame of the rose petal, the flame of the thorn. The sun is a flame, the dog's teeth, flames. To be clear, with the body, Captain, we do as we wish. We can do as we wish with the body, but we cannot leave marks. Captain, I'm trying to get this right. The world's so small, the sky's so high. We pray for rain, it rains. We pray for sun, it suns. We pray on our knees, we move our lips. We pray in our minds, we clasp our hands. Our hands look tied before us. I remember, Captain, something. It didn't happen. Not to me. This guy. I knew him by face. I don't remember his name. One night, walking home from a party, a car it clipped him. For hours he wandered, dazed. His family, his neighbors, with flashlights they searched all night, the woods, calling out. Here's the part, Captain, where I tell a story, as if it were a confession. I was hiding out on Damon Rock, lighting matches and letting them drop to the leaves. Below, little flare-ups, flash fires. A girl wandered down the path. She just stood there, watching the matches fall from my hand. Captain, I'm trying to be precise. Hot day, a cage in the sun, a room without air, the mind-bending heat, the music, a flame. Hey, Metallica, hey, Britney, hey, Airless, hey, Fuse. I don't know how it happened. Perched far above, I offered her a match to pull down her pants. One match, her hairless body. Hey, little girl. I dropped it unlit. I didn't know what it was I was looking at. Hey, Captain, I don't know if I'm allowed. Hey, Captain, years ago I'm walking, one drunk night. Even now I wonder, sometimes I imagine, was I hit? Am I dazed? Imagine, was I hit? Am I dazed? This dream, this confession? Hey, little girl, is your daddy home? Hey, Captain, hey, sir, am I making any sense? The boy stood on the burning deck, stammering, elocution. Wait, the boy stood in the burning cage, stammering. Electrocution. No. The boy stood in the hot room. Stammering I did, stammering I did, stammering I did, stammering I did, stammering. Everything you say I did. I did. Hey Metallica, hey Britney, hey Airless, hey Fuse, hey Phonograph, hey Hades, hey Thoughtless, hey. Captain, this room is on fire. Captain, this body will not stop burning. Captain, oh my Captain, this burning has become a body. Captain, oh my Captain, this child is ash. Captain, oh my Captain, my hands pass right through her. Captain, oh my Captain, I don't know what it is I'm looking at. It's important to be precise, to say what I know. The sun is fire, the center of the earth is fire. Your mother's cunt is fire, an airless flame. Still, I don't know why she pushed me out. This cold furnace, we all were pushed, a rim of light around our heads. She gave a kick, sent us crawling out. Toward the flame, toward the pit, the flaming pit, your lover's tongue, the flame, a thorn. Every day, Captain, sir, Captain, I was left a child after school alone. I found a match under the sink. I found a can, a spray can, Lysol, disinfectant. It made a torch. I was careful the flame didn't enter the can. I knew it would explode. Somehow I knew. I'm trying to be clear, sir. The flame shot across the room. Then it was gone. All right.
Woo!
It's a long one.
Yeah, but still, like, even then, not, right?
Yeah.
For a, 10-page poem, it really isn't, like, actually 10 pages.
Yeah, maybe 100 lines.
Typically. Yeah, and there are definitely sections of this poem that I think are doing more and working better than others. But overall, I thought it was good. Again, now reading it and hearing it the second time, I'm seeing more connections to, the theme of, like, these torture memos and how they come up. And just
And
the war in general.
yeah, and I guess there was that whole just following orders things. Was the big defense, right? And there is some truth to that in terms of if you're a petty officer and your commanding officer tells you to do something and you don't do it, like you will be kicked out of the military type thing. So there is like this kind of level, and like he does this through this kind of like a speaker, like referencing the captain, like asking for reassurance, asking for the rules, right, that aren't really clear. There's a lot of sexuality. There's always a lot of sexuality in a lot of Flynn stuff if you read his stuff. It's vivid, or maybe vivid isn't the right word, because it isn't like, oh, these vivid descriptions. It is like, it's muddled but also vivid. I don't know if does that make sense?
Yeah.
Probably not at all.
Yeah, I mean, things like
that,
kind of blur together, but they're these like
right.
vivid images.
But you can tell that it's like technique, and I tried to read this as it's written, but like this is where I think some of these sections work really well and then other ones don't.
Yeah, what are the ones you don't think work well?
I think some of this, what was the section I read where it was very kind of, all right, I didn't label these sections, but this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourth section I thought worked, but the way it was structured,
I remember
like
Captain something, it didn't happen, not to me, this guy, I knew him by face, that one. Yeah, me too. I have that one circled. I also circled the one before it.
in terms of that not working.
Mm-hmm. I really like the last line of it. I wish that I felt like it could do more here.
Well, he does this stuff with the line structure where he does this in his first book too, where it's like these quick little, it's an extension of the sentence, but then it's also using the technique of line break to create a new, so that it can be read both ways, essentially. Not that it's like he's trying to like do this trick or be cute with it, but it is like to, I remember Captain something, it didn't happen, not to me. But that's broken up in terms of, I remember Captain something, it line break, didn't happen, not break to me, this guy. Like, so it's like, and you could read those, like, if you could read those all together, like through the breaks, or if you stop through the breaks, it does kind of change the pace and direction while keeping it this kind of like, to me, this guy, I knew him by face. I don't remember his name. One night, walking home from a party, a car clipped him. For hours he wandered, dazed his family, his neighbors with flashlights. They searched all night, the woods calling out. So like the line could work by itself, or it could be work like, and it also works with like the previous line type thing. So neighbors with flashlights, they like, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I also just think, I don't know. I just think that this section doesn't, without a little bit more context, it doesn't do anything for me. It's interesting. It's just, it doesn't, without, sort of drawing too many conclusions from what isn't here.
Right. Well,
which
I want to talk
like
about
I'm
that
doing
with the
a lot of.
Right.
I do feel like I'm kind of doing a good bit of that in this book, and that's one of the things that if I was going to be critical of, I would be critical of that.
And we've talked. This is another reoccurring theme on Heavy Board, where we've talked about this in terms of influence, right? So if we are reading a book, and let's say we watch a lecture on it before we record or something like that, so we have somebody else's thoughts kind of influencing ours or something, right? And we're always kind of like, all right, like, how much did that change my thinking type stuff. It's the same idea, but in like poetry, it's like, or fiction or anything. Yeah, it's like once you learn, like we said, if you read this without reading any notes or any of the writings on the book, you might not make the connection. But then sometimes we run the risk of, once we make that connection, well, then like using that to, paint over everything, kind of.
Yeah, and
then,
there is a circumstance which it's like hitting you over the head with it, where it's like, okay, like we don't need, you've already alluded to this thing, we don't need you to tell us, it's referring to this day precisely at this time and that this is exactly what happens. If you give us a little bit, we can run with it. But this is one of those cases where I wish a little bit more had been given. I still remember, like, it's like having a class where your professor gives you a poem that refers to the March on Washington and stops the class to ask you if you all, know what that refers to. It's like, yeah, dude, we didn't need more than that. Like, just that one, the words March on Washington was enough. It was probably a little bit more than enough. This, I wanted a little bit more.
Section 11, I think, works pretty flawlessly, and that's right after the Whitman references, page 18.
It's important to be precise, to say what I know.
I thought that worked pretty flawlessly.
Back pretty well to the very first section. I also thought the Whitman section was good, the one that refers to "Oh Captain, my Captain." I thought the Metallica section, the "Hey Metallica, hey Britney, hey Airless, hey Fuse," it's fun.
Right,
Those are fun lines. I enjoy reading them. So it doesn't diminish anything for me if I were to look at that and be like, is this good enough to stand on its own in like a section of this poem? I'd be like, eh. You could I think you could get rid of it and save it for a different poem.
Yeah, if we removed it, it wouldn't really do much. It's only 2 lines, and it's literally given its own section. So I guess he would want us to particularly pay attention to it, or whatever we could extrapolate out of that. Yeah, I think he wanted
to call more attention to those, those bands that were used.
Right.
In the torture process. And again, he's like being a little bit bitchy about it in the back of the book, which is fun. We enjoy that. Yeah, the other notables from here. I mean, do you have other thoughts on this poem? Or did you want to move on?
No, I think I said everything. But like the fire connecting to sex. I said the line breaks. Sometimes they work better than others, but I can see what he's trying to do with those, so I do give a pass on some of them. It's kind of like a stylistic thing he does, yeah. Modest Mouse references on page 26 and 27.
Yeah, do we think that there's a big... in terms of this second poem that we were just talking about, do you think there are any significant things we haven't touched on that are important to the rest of the book? Like, why the elements, Why do we see these elements come up throughout the book? So he refers to them all: fire, water, air, earth. There's a poem for each of them.
Just left out heart, dude, and we'd be doing Captain Planet.
Yeah, it's true. Kind of is.
Yeah, I didn't really pull a connection into the earth, air, fire. Did you?
We can come back to it. I mean, I think he says the idea of flame, not the flame itself. And that kind of comes back to this, like, first poem to me, where he doesn't talk about flame at all, right? But he basically talks about the idea of the body versus the self. And then there's also, like, I actually don't know. I think he's just using this theme of flame and heat and, like, destruction, right? But then also, I don't know why, I actually don't know why this section of that second section that I think is really strong, to be clear with the body. Captain, we can do as we wish. We can do as we wish with the body, but we cannot leave marks.
In air.
that one's in fire. And
Fire.
so, like, I do wonder why that one came in fire. But yeah, I don't know, maybe fire is something that's also internal here for Flynn. Okay. I don't know. Maybe that's just like a bunch of garbage that I'm saying.
Well, the very first stanza, that the more the idea of the flame than the flame, as in the flame of the rose petal, the flame of the thorn, the sun is a flame, the dog's teeth, flames. Like, it's just kind of saying, like, it's associating flames with any type of violence, but also like the flame of the rose petal, right?
Yeah.
So there is this kind of intensity, heat,
Red.
Red. I even threw sex in there is like, and then that's always torture techniques, right? They go after genitals usually when there's torturing happening. Your most vulnerable, sensitive areas, all that. Humiliation, all that kind of stuff. They do some of this shit to, from what I know about, they do some of this type of shit to like SEALs when they're like training Navy SEALs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so...
Yeah, essentially, like, yeah, torture, basically, to, like, can you withstand this? Like, are you able to keep your composure when we're squirting hoses in your face and asking you to do things? Like,
Goddamn.
or are you going to get pissed off and lose it? Or are you going to... I mean, obviously, this is different. This is completely different. There are reasons for doing it, but...
You want to talk about the last poem of this section?
What was that? Oh, imagination. What about... I did want to hit the Modest Mouse quotes.
Yeah.
In air.
Yeah.
And that is another long one set up just like fire. All the elements are set up the same way using the white space type thing. And that is section 4. Page 26 and 27.
Yeah. Before Modest Mouse, Captain, what was the world? What was the world before pavement? Yeah. Yeah, this is one of the things that, like, this section of this poem, right? I would have to go back.
I just like knowing that Nick Flynn's a Modest Mouse fan.
Yeah, that's
so,
always fun. I'm
yeah.
a Pavement fan.
I was never as
Probably-
into Pavement, yeah.
Probably. I mean, dude, he's probably such a
But,
Chili Peppers bro.
Yeah, well, I do have a few eclectic of my favorites that get made fun of in various circles for. That's why Sophie made the Chili Peppers comment. Is, I'm a Chili Peppers. I'm a big Chili Peppers
I mean,
fan.
the word Californication doesn't not come up in this poem.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. Dream of Californication.
Fucking Anthony Kiedis.
Anthony Kiedis. And the Modest Mouse, dude, we'll all float on okay, we'll all float on okay. And he ends 2 sections with that
Yeah, honestly, I
in this
thought
poem.
this poem worked not as good as Fire. I think sections of it work really well.
Yeah, I think that's true for all of these element poems. Like
Yeah.
we already said, is that like it doesn't work as well as the first one. But still works. I backed my car into a cop car the other day.
Yeah. We put them in cages. They don't like the cages. We put them in cells. They pray. That's a great sounding
Yeah.
first couple lines. I swim in the palace. It rains from the sky. The pool between palm tree and wall. The air in the cells is poison, they claim. The air in the cages is dust. I sink to the bottom to see what it's like, a grave in the air where you won't lie too cramped. Is that a lyric?
I think so. I think all the
Yeah.
italicized stuff are direct lines from songs. I think he plays little plays on them,
Yeah.
though. Like, I think he warps them slightly so they're not exact lines. Like, with the next page is the supercalifragilistic hyperventilation.
Yeah, that's fun.
Supercalifragilistic californication.
Yeah, so again, I think there's a solution to torture and breathing, right? Where air is replaced with, dust or poison, or water, right? It's replaced with literally like almost all the other elements.
Oh, that was the big thing, right? It was gas chamber stuff, torture. I think now that I'm thinking about it, uh, that was like one of the big bombshells that came out of the investigation.
Yeah, and of course we already know. I mean, I think the one that everybody knows is waterboarding, right? That was like one of the big ones.
Shit, yeah, and that's the least of
Yeah.
it compared to some of this shit. Jesus.
But like, I
Yeah.
just remember that being like a huge, and
Yeah,
like
dude.
this
Chris,
was some,
Chris Hitchens getting waterboarded on BBC.
that happened.
Yeah, dude. I think you can find it on YouTube,
Good
listeners. It's so fucking ridiculous. Yeah, dude.
That's insane.
Oh, yeah.
I feel
wouldn't
I feel
volunteer, that's
embarrassed
for sure.
just hearing it. Wow. Yeah, and then it ends, a grave in the air where you won't lie too cramped. They don't have wings, so we lift them. It's chilling
Yeah.
by the time we get there. And, there are places that I still don't fully understand what we're saying, right? And again, I do feel like this is a place where I think maybe I'm leaning a lot on what I've read about the book or what I read in the back of the book, but I think it is starting. So one of the things that I would say this book does pretty well is it starts to accumulate meaning. I think that goes back to what you were saying before, is that he's good at sort of putting these things together. We have these themes that keep coming back around and these images that keep coming back around, and over time they accumulate into something larger. And that's what we like to
Right.
see.
And constantly ground, so that when you have that, then it's like almost like a rope where you can go off into the ether,
Yeah, and there are places that
pull
still
random shit out.
feel
But you're still tethered to like the ground. You're still tethered to the real world in some way.
Yeah, and even something like song lyrics can help you really do that. I will say there are places where I still feel a little bit ungrounded, and again, some of that might be owed to the fact that I've only read this once. I'm a big believer that, every poem deserves a second reading. Unless it's trash, then maybe not. I don't know.
Or it could just be, to the fact that it doesn't quite work. That's what I'd say about a lot of his stuff is, even if when I think it doesn't work, I can still see what he's trying to do, and I appreciate that. Because, you can kind of see where it's coming from. It's not just, so out of left field that you're like, wait a minute, what? It's like, oh, you're trying to really broaden not just what the language can do, but what the space of the page can do, what the line structure can do, what, all of these, what bringing in references to song lyrics can do. There's a lot of that, I think, it usually works.
Well, it's always interesting to see a poet who pulls from a lot of different sources, because you're also sort of depending on those sources to create meaning for the poem, right?
Right, and then you want to talk about that? Where's the line?
What do you mean?
In terms of, well, I know we said we'd talk about this erasures or something that he has with these redacted.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's definitely.
But just where's the line, right? So how much can you rely on this outside thing before it starts to weaken, what we would call the poem or some aspect
right,
of the
well,
poem.
and
if
I
not
think
the whole
that's
thing.
really dependent, right? Again, you don't want to hit the reader over the head with it. It's annoying. It's yes, we get it, right? Sometimes, and you can see this with certain poems that might have historical references. I think that's probably the biggest one, if you allude to something historical, or if especially if you're writing in the voice of someone historical, you can hit people over the head with the thing that you're trying to say about it. And that can
He does
be
a little
true.
bit of that in his second book, The Blind
And
Huber,
anyone
because it's
can
about
do
a
that,
real person.
It doesn't have to be a historical thing. It could be just about anything.
Right.
I think when you're depending on something outside of the poem to make the poem make sense, it's not going to work.
Yeah,
I think
well, that's my
the
thing. Is
line. I think you can't
Yeah.
depend on what isn't on the page to, help the reader understand it. Right? I think that's risky. And I think, and we can just sort of talk about it now, I think. It's one of the later, it's at the halfway halfway point about. A little
I think all
further.
the redacted stuff starts in like
Third section.
the third
Yeah,
section.
you're right. So we're skipping ahead a little bit, but we might as well just talk about it since we're talking about it. We have this poem, Seven Testimonies, and redacted in parentheses.
And some of this you can see that the way that this is another good thing about Grey Wolf, where they do the book design on the inside cover of the book, you see the actual redacted manuscripts, at least partial, some of them, which is cool. It's just a cool little art design to have in a poetry book, you know.
Yeah, I wonder, are those the actual redacted ones, or are those his redacted ones? Like where he...
I think those are his
Yeah,
redacted
okay.
ones. So it's like the transcript, but it's
But
like his
he blacked out
redactions. So-
parts to... Yeah, okay.
right. So if you look at the first one there, it says, "I woke up, asked why, my children, my wife, my leg." Same thing as the beginning.
So I don't think we need to read all of these. So I'll just...
No.
So from Seven Testimonies, redacted. I woke up, I asked why. My children, my wife, my leg. Outside, my head, cold, rainy. A tent, there were others. I heard my brother, a pipe, cold, water at night. They let me go once, my hands always laughing. That one I would say might be the one that works the best.
Yeah, and then you can tell my thing with erasures, and like we were talking a little bit about this as we read through it this week with it's, I know there's like a craze, there was a craze even a few years ago of people being obsessed with erasures.
Yeah, it got hot in the
mainly
2010s,
because-
I would say.
Yeah, and I always say mainly, I would say, because erasures are easier.
I think they're like a fun practice, and I think they can be especially fun if you're doing something like visual. Like if you are like a visual artist who's doing something with language, like they can be fun. And it's always interesting, of course, to back yourself into any corner to try to make something happen, right?
Yeah.
It's a way to see what you can make with what little you have. But I always wonder in those cases that more often than not, I see poems like this, especially the ones where you can kind of see what was blacked out a little bit still. Right? Some people do that, and I can't point to any specific one. It's like I've seen them. Whether it was like a friend who did it, or if it was like in some journal I was reading.
Well, I just mean, so
Where
if I
it's
take a
so
sentence,
dependent. It can be so dependent on the thing that's been erased to make the poem make meaning. Where if you
Right.
like take away my knowledge that it was built from this other thing, if you like removed that from the page entirely, if you removed it from the notes, would this still have any meaning to me? And
that's because, I guess you're talking about the way it's printed, so it is printed as if it's not an erasure.
yeah, in this
on the
case,
actual
sometimes
pages.
like I've seen them where you have an erasure poem where you see the blackout,
Right.
like the inside
Right.
of this cover.
And that's easier to do now in like the digital age than
Yeah.
it would have been, even like 10, 12 years ago. But yeah, my thing with that is like, so if I take a sentence and I cut out every word but the article the, to like move along, with an erasure, it's kind of just like, okay, like, like, oh,
Yeah,
the. I cut out every word of the sentence but the, because I needed to move along, kind of thing. And I'm just like, I mean, it's not like there's a correct answer or not, but I don't know, I guess I've always just kind of had a little issue with erasure poems.
I think it all just, there's always something that you think, could this have worked better? Like if he had played more maybe with like the actual language of the testimonies and wrote and I'm sure there are people that would say like that's really risky, like can you repurpose that, which like here he already has. Can you pretend to be the voice of one of the people giving these testimonies that endured this torture? So you're gonna have somebody who thinks that's not okay, of course, and like maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not here to decide that, but do I think it would have made a better poem had he been a little more playful and taken more liberties in terms of like building it from the ground up himself and maybe borrowing from that language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then you run into the problem that we already talked about, which is how much outside. So if we're relying on what's blacked out to give us context into the meaning of these poems, it can be a problem because it's not. I guess it's not technically outside the poem, but like it is.
Yeah, I mean,
because we've redacted it and removed it to create the poem, kind of thing. I don't know. I guess I always just had an issue with erasures because it always just feels a little cheap to me. Like a little like, well, if I take a Shakespeare play and start
crossing shit out,
redacting lines, like, is that the same thing as composing poet? Like it just, as a reoccurring theme, at least for me on this podcast, I'm always, we're broadening and broadening to meaninglessness. And it's not that erasure is an illegitimate form, but it's kind of like, I would say, the lowest.
The thing is, I think I found the actual testimonies more compelling than I found the poems.
Right, so almost distracting from like what you've composed, kind of thing.
Yeah, and and they're not like super brief. Like they're short. The testimonies are short. And they're in the back of the book. You can read them. It will take you longer to read them than it will to read the poem, of course. And there are lines that are like, in the 7th one, it begins, "My eyesight is fading. In a few years, I will be blind." That's fucking arresting, right? Like,
yeah.
And it's really disturbing. I mean, they're unsettling, right? Of course, they're testimonies of people who were tortured. But yeah, this is just one of those cases where I feel like it's not there for me yet. I want more from these poems to feel like they're actually, doing something here and making real use of the thing that it's borrowing from.
Yeah, and if you didn't know, because that it was like erasure poems, how does that change the reading? Because when I first read this, I didn't know they were erasures.
Yeah, right. Like, and you wouldn't. You have to go to the back of the book to know that.
Right.
So how does that change the reading for you? Like, what did you think of this poem the first time you read it, not knowing?
I liked it better once I knew the context.
Right, because there's very little to ground you here. Like, you don't really know. Other than the fact that it says 7 testimonies, it's like, well, that's referring to something. What the fuck is it referring to? You don't know that until you read in the back of the book. And without it, it's really hard to place. It's really hard to sort of ground yourself in these poems, and it's hard to make sense of these poems. And you get a sense of urgency, and you get a sense of despair, but you don't get much else. And again, I think that first one works well. I woke up, I asked why, my children, my wife, my leg. I think that's a perfectly fine first few lines. But again, it wasn't enough, even as I went on. Like, if it had developed the scene more, if it had stayed in this space and used from these testimonies and tried to, like, build this one voice that was telling this testimony instead of trying to sort of situate it as, like, 7 different ones. I think maybe that could have worked. Again, taking more sort of creative liberties and taking things from the testimonies without confining yourself to that. I think this poem could have worked a little bit better. That's just me.
Yeah, it wasn't one of my favorites, but
yeah, I thought we could talk about it a little bit since, we were talking about it anyway. Do you want to talk about imagination, or do we want to move on? Do we want to just talk about a thematic thing?
Let's hit imagination and then we can do themes, because
Because, I mean, after Imagination, I don't know if there are many other poems that I had marked as being, like, poems that I really...
Yeah.
I think we could talk about the last couple poems, maybe, and why those were lackluster. But yeah, talk to me about Imagination.
So, Imagination is the last poem in the first section, page 32. Before, like Sophie and I said, the second and third sections start to drift a little bit away from what we got out of the first section in this particular book. But Imagination's a short one, page 32. Imagination. The ground's not a bad place to live for a while, a few years. Not face down, exactly. Not face up, either. Hovering, say, over the dirt, the earth. Is dirt. Our body's dirt, and you floating there, a hand's width above me, just until things blow over. That war, say, Jesus. Did we really just make it all up? It's just great.
Yeah, I mean, and there are some really killer ending lines here in this book, too. I'd say that's one of them. And one thing I would note, too, is, you know, the way that you read it with all of this enjambment, right? It's funny because when you're reading it on the page, the internal rhyme is really, really loud. So I would recommend to anybody to go look up this poem and actually just read it for yourself so you can hear it.
And the reason I say, like, with these line structures, it does add emphasis in places that you wouldn't think to without that line structure.
Yeah.
Like, the thing that struck me about this was kind of how vague it was, but then how it still worked, like, despite that. Like, especially that reference to war. That war, say, Jesus, did we really just make it all up? Like, that war. We don't know what war, right? We can assume from the context of this book, maybe he's talking about, the Iraq War, but we don't know exactly.
It's grounded enough. I think that's the thing, right?
Exactly. Like,
It
that word
It
war,
also starts with something that's really, like, that everybody can grasp. The ground's
doing
not a bad
so much
place to
work.
live for a while, a few years, not face down, exactly, not face up either. And then, like, so we're already grounded in this idea of, like, okay, being in the ground, maybe being buried, maybe, you know, just sort of behind something, like literally living on the ground, sort of. And then it gets sort of more blurred, right? Hovering, say, over the dirt.
Say, it's almost like a chorus,
Yeah.
right? Hovering, say, over the dirt.
Or like, you know, let's say you're hovering over the dirt, you know? Our body's dirt.
He does
you
this
floating there. So now we get you. And who is you here? I read this as me, as the reader, right?
Yeah.
Hands width above
I think it's
me,
structured to give us that,
right? You are the thing that's floating there above me, the poem, the poet, whatever this is. A hand's width above me, just until things blow over. As though this is some kind of escape. We're just reading until this blows over. We're just hanging out here in the ground. You know, and I think the other interesting thing about this poem is, like, what is it that we're making up here, right? The reason for the war itself, like the horror of the war. It's not an ambiguity here that I think bothers me. I don't know about you. Or if it's not ambiguous to you.
Well, like I said, I guess we could, if we projected the themes of the book onto it, it's talking about specifically the Iraq War, but I think it's broader than that, like, and I think that's intentionally done.
Well,
right?
I think that's one of the
earlier,
things
but
that's really good about this poem, right? Especially any poem that's about a specific thing, a specific event in time, has to work outside of it.
And the kind of, like, did we really just make it all up? Well, famously, right, we invaded Iraq on false pretenses. That's famous, but that's could go for almost anything. Like, you know, the imagination. We can create something out of thin air, and use that as a justification for almost anything. Right. Like, the human mind can do this. The human beings can do this. Nobody is immune. Like, I see it every day, right? We project, we make up thought processes of people we don't even know, and we say, Jesus, did we really just make it all up? And the answer is yes, right? We did,
Yeah.
like, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Also,
But like,
is this the first moment in the book that we even get the word war?
I think so. I think it might be
Yeah.
the only.
So, I mean,
reference
that's kind
that we
of
get the word war.
Remarkable, I would say, and a
Yeah.
book that is really, in large part, about war. Or the aftermath of war, even.
It's just enough. Like it's just enough.
But yeah, I would say this is one of the clearest ones in the poem, and I think it holds up. I think it can stand alone for sure, and I like it. I enjoy it. Are there other specific ones that you wanted to talk about? There's this one section of this one poem that I was reading earlier today, and I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, what is happening now? And this is like, as you know, I was reading the end of the poem, but yeah, where do you want to go?
Which one did you say?
I didn't say which one yet. I'm holding off in case, because it's at the end, so I want to wait and see if you have other ones that you want to talk about.
The only one that I had marked, other than those two we already went over, was the baffled king composing.
Yeah.
The baffled king composing, hallelujah.
That's one of the prose
The minor
poems.
fall and the major lift.
Yeah, it's one of the prose
Yeah.
poems. Yeah, this is. I also thought this was.
Well,
Well
clearly
done.
from the Cohen reference, right? Hallelujah, that song,
Yeah.
which has been redone a bunch of times. Rufus Wainwright
Yeah.
did a great cover of
People
this. by the
fucking
way,
love
if
that one.
anybody's
I don't love
interested,
that. That's
yeah.
not my favorite cover.
People love the Jeff Buckley.
I fucking love the Jeff
one.
Buckley one, dude.
Yeah, everybody loves the Jeff Buckley one. I like it. It's not a bad one, but I think Rufus Wainwright's version of it was a great little cover. Probably the best
I
cover
think those
that's
are
done
the two
it.
big ones.
But yeah, so if you don't know the song, look it up. It's a good song. Whichever version you choose, the original was Leonard Cohen, so
Yeah, listen to them all.
whichever
They're good.
version. Yeah.
They're all good.
Jubilee. Our war is almost over. Again, we ship out. Yeah, again, that was a great little. Again, I thought it was. I put
Tomorrow,
fuck yes next
again, back to wherever it
Yeah.
was. We began, again. Photograph stuck to the fridge, a red plastic donut underfoot, a bathtub filling. Amen. Yeah.
to it. Yeah, the parentheticals, the use of structure. I mean, think of what he's using here, where he's talking M dashes, italics, backslashes, parentheticals.
And in this one, we do have periods, I will say.
Yeah,
You
periods
don't always
and
get
commas,
that.
and yeah.
It seems something more common in his prose poems than in his lineated poems, which makes sense in terms of a stylistic choice to me, because, you know, you don't have the same use of line break as punctuation.
Yeah, the baffled king composing Hallelujah. I am a little bit like, where does that come in?
Yeah. And I mean, it could be one of those things where, like, we need to go back and, like, listen to the song. I do wish
Yeah.
it came in a little more.
I heard there was a secret chord. Yeah, we created a wasteland, bye-bye, and called it peace.
Yeah, that's one of those last sentences that's really good. And I would say the
Yeah.
beginning of this is really good, and I would say the middle of it is a little bit fuzzy.
Yeah, right at the close your eyes.
Yeah. Close your eyes. Where are you right now? What city? No? Nothing? Krishna trying to convince is it Arjuna?
I don't know.
I don't know.
No idea.
I don't know.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Of the righteousness of battle, boiled it down to 11 words. We'll never untangle the circumstances that brought us to this moment. Still nowhere? Here's another hint. My hands are not inside you. Your hands are not inside me, and one of us has forgotten how to breathe. We created a wasteland bye-bye and called it peace. Yeah, no, I think the middle still works. I think I'm still, like, sort of untangling it in my head.
What language is that, Krishna?
Well, I think it's what religion is that, right? Hinduism?
Okay, right.
Is that Hinduism?
Okay. No idea, man.
Bhagavad Gita? That sounds about right to me. Hang on. I don't know shit. Fucking look up pronunciation. Yeah, it's from the Bhagavad Gita.
What the fuck is that?
I mean, I think that's Hinduism.
I have no idea. I'm not very educated on world religions. I know the big ones, but I don't know. So I don't even know that much about... I probably know the least about Islam, but I know probably the most in terms of religion: Christianity,
I'm pretty sure it's
then
Hinduism,
Judaism,
and
then Islam, probably. The big three, you know. And the Judaism's just by default, not just because my best friend is Jewish, but
man, I don't even know Judaism, guys.
Yeah,
you know more than I do,
raised,
probably.
Well, it's because I was raised Catholic.
Yeah,
so
all my friends who were raised Catholic know more about Judaism.
All those, well, because it's the first book in the whole fucking religion is all the Jewish religion. So it's like I know all the stories from the original Old Testament because I was, ingrained into my head over like my elementary school through high school style learning. Even before that, right? When you're a baby and you're reading the stories and.
Dude, why can't it just give me is it Arjuna? I was just looking for a phonetic spelling.
It's Hindi.
I couldn't find
If it's a Hindi or Farsi or I don't know any of the pronunciations for that or no idea.
Sanskrit. Origins in Sanskrit.
Oh, it's Sanskrit?
Its origins. Has its origins in Sanskrit language.
Yeah, well, Sanskrit's the oldest language we know of. Yeah. I mean, I don't know shit about Sanskrit. I just know it's the oldest language, and it's basically the basis for all languages, which started... say it with me, listeners, right in the Middle East. There is where we get a lot of the written history, at least, is tracked towards. The Abrahamic religions that I just mentioned, all tracked to there. What we refer to today as the Middle East. Arabic numerals, right? Our numbers, our writing. But like you said, it's not Arabic, but I think that's also taken from Sanskrit. I don't know. Those that are fascinated about languages or know this, leave it in the comments. Comment and correct us. I think, dude, we get something wrong every single
100%.
episode. I think every single episode we've recorded.
All right, I'm just reading books.
Yeah, we've said something completely wrong. Yeah. Every single episode we've said something completely wrong or inaccurate or straight up false, dude. Like, all right, leave it in the comments. All right, correct us in the comments.
Yeah, but it's where... So we have a speaker that's now posing it as like almost a riddle, right? And we've had this elsewhere in the book. We had it earlier in a different prose poem. But because...
Well, we have Krishna, we have Jesus, we have...
Still nowhere. Here's another hint, right? So now it's posed to us as like a riddle. So we're supposed to like have some guess about where we are, right? And then he gives us a negation. He gives us where we're not. My hands are not inside you. Your hands are not inside me. And one of us has forgotten how to breathe. Any ideas?
No, and like I said, I don't know any of that religion stories, so I don't know any of that. Like the origin stories, the legends, the creation myths. I don't know any of that. I would know the Greek stuff better than I would know that, and I really don't know the Greek stuff very well at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm tempted to go back to that first poem where he describes each of us as like, a ship inside a bottle, right? And one day that ship sails, and we just say bye-bye.
I'm willing to accept it, dude. I mean, like I said, I don't know better. If listeners out there do, put it in the comments. We'd love to hear it.
Interesting. It's like, I think it's thought-provoking. I think it's a poem I want to read again before I pass any judgment about whether or not that middle portion is like making sense.
Even if you don't like Nick Flynn, like even if you hear us say like some of these poems we don't like, I mean, like just reading his books is an experience. So even if you don't like it at the end of it, like you should give it a read if you haven't.
And that's
like
how
give his
reading
books
poems
a read.
should be, right? Like it should be an event.
Yeah, and then when you read a collection like this that's kind of, I would say, very well themed, and then it doesn't seem like it in some parts, but I think it is very structured, not just in like the individual
Yeah.
poems, but in the way it's laid
Oh,
out
yeah,
throughout
I
the
think
book.
it is.
Yeah.
I also think that this is a book that you want to sit down and you like, maybe read it in 1 to 2 sittings, right? Like this isn't like some big fat collected, or it isn't like some super dense work where like you want to sort of really like, I can read a poem here and there and, that's enough. These poems, I think,
Right.
that like a lot of them can stand alone. I think in large part they work best together.
Yeah, this is not like reading Robert Lowell.
And in some of the cases, as I said, I still think some of them, like, I want more from them. I think the end of this book is kind of lacking, and I might change. I feel like this is a book I'm going to read again and change my mind on that. So, whatever. Maybe future me will hate me for saying that.
Well, it's always fascinated to me too, because I always say like, we have less books, less people read, less people buy books than ever before, but yet we're getting more books published than ever before. So it's this weird kind of, the market demand type stuff is really just kind of, we're overflowing the market with stuff we don't have a demand for, essentially. So a lot of books lose money, right? People don't read it, whatever. But poetry books, I'm always kind of shocked, because considering the social media taking over every aspect of the world, like poetry books are short. Like you can read a poetry book in one sitting. Like I sat down and read this one time in an hour, and then I sat down and read it again the next day, like same amount of time, like an hour, right? So it's not a very long book, 90 pages, and it's not like there's a lot of prose all over those pages. It's very short poetry structure, so you can read through 90 pages in an hour. And I'm not like some speed reader or something, anything like that. But it kind of baffles me as to why more people aren't reading poetry, because it is like the shorter way to get what you would want to get out of literature. And you can do that like, an hour in your day. You sit down and read a little book. Maybe even if you don't get it the first time, like Sophie said,
Yeah,
just read it. Maybe you don't even want to read it again, but it takes an hour to read and you do get something out of it.
And not every book of poems
even if you don't
takes
like
an hour
it.
to read. There will be those that like, have poems that are like a little bit denser. Maybe you just sort of really tightly wound. You want to read them again and again. And maybe you just want to read like 2 or 3 at a time. And like, that's okay too. This is a book that I think reads pretty quickly.
Most contemporary books, I would say, just read through. Like, it's not like we've done a lot of collected works on this pod, and those take, days to get through.
And it also can depend on like how the book is sort of put together, right? Like we get a lot of these books that are heavily thematic, and virtually every collection of poems is, right? Every poet has their themes, even if it's just like for a moment that they're constantly writing about. That'll make its way into poems, and you can always sort of look through those for those, even if it's in a book that isn't as like super about one thing, as this book kind of is. Whether it's like, you might have one that's like a coming of age sort of collection of poems, or one that tells like a really specific narrative about a time in a speaker's, life, and some story that they're telling. I would say this is like akin to that, right? Like it's sort of about one event. They're not really dense poems. Definitely read them in one go.
But yeah, I'm just always shocked. It's like, well, if you don't have time to read, well, poetry's the perfect option, but this thing is most people don't even like poetry.
But
dude.
people say that, but it also depends. Like it does depend. Like
most contemporary writers, dude, like they haven't even studied this shit. Like they couldn't even read poem or tell you about it, talk about it. But like they're, it's kind of remarkable. I think it kind of shows how shitty education is right now. Is like, and this will come up on the podcast. I don't think we'd ever do like an MFA episode. I think that's kind of cringe. But like, I always blame MFA programs just because of like, why do we separate fiction from poetry so much? Not just because they're different genres, but because like literally the way the courses and structure of most stuff is set up, you pick one and then you spend your college years or your graduate school years studying only one.
Yeah.
Maybe a little overlap here and there. And that's just like an enforced
who don't
thing.
Feel comfortable talking about poetry, right? I ran into that much more than I ran into poets who weren't comfortable talking about fiction.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up, because I would see this all the time in grad school. People would turn to me, and these were usually people on the fiction track, if you don't know by now, Sophie and I were in poetry tracks for our grad school, but it was like they would be like, I don't know, is this good? They'd like hand it to me, like, I have a hard time determining what a good poem is, and I just would look at them.
I had straight up MFA fiction teachers ask me that, which is like wild to me.
That's very low. Yeah. That's a new low. Yeah.
I don't want to be an asshole. And it's entirely
and I'd always be like,
they were just giving me like, they were throwing me a bone or giving me an opportunity or trying to like give me work that they didn't feel like doing themselves, and like whatever, I don't care. That's basically what grad students are for, I guess. But yeah, that I was surprised to encounter that so frequently.
It's funny, and I always said like it's funny that you tell me that like, oh, I don't know if it makes a poem good or not. I was like, because I've never thought that of fiction. Oh, I don't know if I can tell if this is good or not. It's like, nope, never had that thought. Never in my life. Like,
well, it's like you can
maybe
read
you would know better.
can't
No.
you? Like,
right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, well, you know how to read, right? Yeah.
But yeah,
like,
I know. I think, well, and I think I still run into this problem though, where I say, you know, I'm not prepared to say if this is a good poem or a bad poem. Like, I can't go off my gut feeling. Because there is something about poems where it's like, yeah, it's hard often to read it once and say this is good or bad. But when it's really bad, you know, like when it's about like when you are reading poems for like a journal or something, more often than not, I feel like when you label something as a bad poem, you can be pretty confident. But some of that is also a matter of taste, right?
Well, it's all a matter of taste. That's why,
some of taste is a
we're
matter
pro-judgment.
of preferences. And, like, we recognize that we all have our own preferences, whether they're about sound or subject or whatever else.
Yeah, we're pro-judgment on this podcast. We've always been a pro-judgment podcast. But even this is why I like Harold Bloom, even if I disagree with him on things, is like, he has a famous quote, right? Like, it's all personal. Like, it's all personal. Like, if you're going to sit here and say I'm not being objective enough, it's like, well, then you're not talking about your opinion on like literature, because like it's all a personal interpretation. It's
you're
all a personal
always depending,
reference. So,
you know, however much schooling this person has had, and right, like, you know, and someone like Harold Bloom has had like a lot of schooling in the classics, right?
He was the teacher for the last 5 decades. I mean, he was the guy that taught everybody else.
But whatever it is, you are depending entirely on the things that they love in books, right? Some of it's going to matter on what was the emphasis of their education. Some of it's going to matter about, you know, what are their personal obsessions. Some of it's just going to matter about, like, maybe you choose books based on like what resonates with you, and that has an impact on, like, you know, say the identities of the kinds of authors you choose.
I think what we're really saying is that poetry studying is superior to fiction, so you should just study poetry instead of fiction.
Yeah, if you're gonna, I will say, the thing, I do wish that I'd had more fiction study, because I think that would have helped me. I think that could have been helpful to like my prose generally, but I think in a lot of ways studying poetry can help your prose a lot too, and just worth studying. It makes you a good reader too.
Yeah, well, I mean, the oldest stories we had were poems, so again, it's like poetry is the all-encapsulating form, kind of. Like you said, do you know how to read sentences? Because if you struggle with that, like, study some poetry, take a class or two, with a good teacher, because, you know, we've talked about this all the time. Sometimes you get a shit teacher, you get somebody who's burned out, or somebody who just doesn't give a fuck, or, you know, whatever it is. You know, there's a bunch of possibilities. You can get a great teacher, you can get a mediocre one, you can get a terrible one, you know. And that does affect your interest and how much you retain. But I guess we're way off topic.
We are.
Basically, we're preaching the superiority of studying poetry. So get on that.
In Earth, we do get a really reference to the memos. Right, that's the first place where we see the word memo come up. I guess in the second section of that poem, page 40. Okay. If I understand the memo right, Captain, we can use water, but we cannot use earth. That is, we can simulate drowning, but not burial. Is that right, sir? Captain? I've read the memos, and I want to do what's right.
There's like a tinge of humor to it
Yeah.
too, which I guess is what it's like, and it works.
It works
like,
really
it's not
well
like
because it's like,
it
well, it's
doesn't,
like bitchy, you know.
and it doesn't belittle the subject matter, and it doesn't take away from it. Like it works in this really unique way that I think only somebody like Nick Flynn or somebody trying to copy him could do. It's very original. It's very Nick Flynn, right? When you read something like this, you're like, oh, this is Nick Flynn. This is a Nick Flynn poem kind of thing, which is what you look for, right? Great writers, great artists. They have a very distinct style, sound, whatever it is.
Yeah, I
But
think
yeah.
the first two sections of this one, and this is one of the elemental poems. It's titled Earth. Their sections again, I think, work really well. I would say this is one of the ones. I like the elemental poems. I think some worked better than others. I think it's a matter of how many sections in this one, you know, are really strong.
And section poems are in right now, right? Like they've
Yeah, they're
kind
hot.
of, it's always been a thing, but they're really hot. At least they were like the last 5-6 years. The only issue with section poems, right, is sometimes you can run into trouble because, like, from what I know, like my own experience trying to compose poems, especially longer ones, it's easy to lose the plot. You try to compose a long work of fiction, same type of thing, right? You can lose the what am I saying? The vibe is, for lack of a better word. You can lose the tone sometimes when you're doing longer, multiple sections, because not all those sections fit together, right? I know when you're editing, you're probably putting sections in, taking sections out, so you never know. But like, just the dangers of doing longer stuff, and you have to
It's
have
harder.
skill. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. That's what I'm trying to say.
I
is that
mean,
it's much harder.
I'm not saying it's
and-
easy to write a super tight, concise and like condensed poem, right? Like
Right.
writing that little tiny well-oiled machine is tough. It's also really hard to sustain a long poem, and I think that Flynn does it well. And I think he sort of has his two primary modes where he has like these longer lines that are all sort of crushed together, and then he has sort of couplets, I guess. Not always couplets, but I think it works well. Captain, the memo says we cannot bury the prisoner, but does that mean we can bury his son? I mean, does it say we can pretend to bury his son? Captain, does the memo say we cannot pretend to bury the prisoner's son? Does it say we cannot make the prisoner dig his son's grave? Does it say we cannot make the prisoner place his son in the hole? I'm trying, Captain, and he still has not answered my question.
Right.
It gets very, like, I get a really good kind of bitchy in this one. Like, it's just really
Well, because it is kind of
seething.
and it's using that humor to show the ridiculousness of the specifics that were used as excuses for the kind of what we would literally illegal torture, right? We could say, oh, it violates Geneva Convention, it violates even
Yeah.
U.S. rules of engagement, it was technically illegal, they were breaking the law. And there's this kind of cynicism to a lot of Nick Flynn stuff, so like that's where I think the humor kind of sits nicely in terms of these big powerful entities that we call governments or whatever break the law all the fucking time. I mean, like the law is for thee, not for me type thing, right?
Yeah.
So there is like that kind of, it comes through in that light kind of like humor that we're talking about. There's little moments of cynicism, bitchiness. Works. You want to hit themes? I guess we already hit a lot of them. Or do you want to hit another poem?
I will just say that this is also the poem that ends. That dream again, Captain. As soon as I close my eyes shut. The one where the car goes into a skid and I can't pull out. The one where I wipe my ass, but the paper never comes clean. That's pretty bold to end a poem that way, especially a long poem. Just wanted to say that. Let's hit themes. I think hitting a few.
I had that dream about you again, where I drove my car right off a fucking cliff. Blink 182.
Oh, Blink 182, yeah. Yeah, we already talked about the 7 testimonies. I would say there was this one piece, of this one poem. What was it? Is it Saudade? Saudade? Page 78.
What did you say about it?
Apparently it's a word for longing, melancholy, and nostalgia. The only thing, like, so I struggled with this poem. There was one section that just made me laugh because I was like, what the fuck is happening now? And it's on page 82.
What was it?
It just begins, oysters. One sentence, one stanza, all on its own. Oysters. A pool table in the basement. Whatever drops overboard, whatever you bury, whatever is abandoned rises up, washes up, will all eventually be salvage. Yeah, I had trouble with this one. Also, just because having a single sentence that's just oysters kind of made me laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't care if we cut that bit. I just wanted to say that's fucking wild. But this is also...
It does fit with the themes, though, like in this, where like the very first line is this boat, this broken boat, beam, stem, keel, oar. This beach littered with broken boats, broken beam, broken stem, broken keel, broken oar. This head littered with broken eyes, this mouth littered with broken teeth, rot stench, mold stench, tooth stench, gone. I pass a woman on the street. We slept together. Once, a night too stormy to row, back out. The tower towers above us. I love that one, too. Now we can see it. From wherever, it gives the impression we will never get lost. And then, then eventually we get to that section.
Yeah, I mean,
oysters.
Whatever you bury, whatever is abandoned, rises up, washes up, will all eventually be salvaged. So, it doesn't not make sense, but it just, I don't know that it warrants its own sentence and stanza. Maybe it does.
It is risky.
It's very
well,
risky.
Even if it doesn't, like, it's a big risk. Like, that's a bold fucking move. And this is one of the things I appreciate about Flynn's writing style. Fucking bold.
And is this the last poem? I think it is. But we go back to the sort of ship idea from the beginning here. So I think he's trying to tie that together. But it's still like, I don't know, this poem didn't do it for me the way some of the others did. I would have liked to see it, maybe us land on like, I don't know. I wanted, I just wanted more from the last couple poems. I would say that there was a prose poem that wasn't so bad. Pulse, Hidden Bird, that was okay. The end, like I said, though, we do come back to the idea of these boats. There is a boat which is no more a boat, beside a house which is no more a house, in a town which is no more a town. We no longer say hello, no longer seem to even see each other. I wonder now whether we'd ever been together at all. It goes back to the idea of, what is holding us together, telephone, song, horizon. It also goes back to this idea of like, everybody is a bottle with a ship inside it, right?
Yeah. Did you want to hit themes or...
I mean,
we kind of covered most of them.
I think we covered them. I think the biggest ones, I think we hit the elements. I think we hit the war. I think we hit the torture memos. I think we hit, I think those were, just torture generally. I think this is maybe I'm sort of just repeating what I read in the couple reviews I read after I finished the book, but there's something to be said about, I think, the psychological effects of war. Obviously there are the physical ones too. But I think that maybe that's some of what we're getting at with some of these boat images.
When it goes with the captain. While captain is a military rank, it's still associated most with sea voyages.
Yeah, and I think he does that on purpose. I think it
right.
Pulls both of those together on purpose. I think it does it well.
I don't know the military ranks specifically either, but I know captain on most boats would mean you're the highest ranking, but I know that's not true for the military, so
I don't know shit about the military.
I only know very vague rankings of lieutenant, major, captain, general, like the way the U.S. ranks it in most of the world. And there's like in between steps, there's lieutenant major, there's, lieutenant general, it's not, I don't know enough about it. Any military people out there can correct us, but
yeah, good read, fun read, worth reading.
Good read, fun read. Is that it?
That's all I got. All 5 of you motherfuckers.
Well, we're starting to get a little movement there, so maybe more than 5 now. I don't know.
Oh,
Come
shit.
join us, little
My
ones.
bad, guys.
Come join us. Come join us, listeners. Join the Heavy Board podcast. Subscribe on Patreon. All right, yeah. So we're still looking for workshop horror stories. If you have a workshop horror story that you're willing to share with us, it'd be convenient because next episode's our Halloween episode, dude. So that would be convenient if you had some. We'd throw the horror in there. Send in a workshop horror story to heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. We also have subscription plans. You can subscribe to support this podcast to receive full uncensored episodes and our entire back catalog, bonus episodes, interviews, all that good stuff at patreon.com/heavyboard. If you don't want to do that, we have subscribe to this podcast on your favorite listening platform, subscribe to our YouTube channels, like, share with friends and family, leave us a 5-star review. All of that helps this podcast out, and there's free ways to support us. And next episode, we are doing Dracula by Bram Stoker for our Halloween episode here. So pick yourself up a copy if you haven't read it. Classic. This could be one where we do movie comparisons, too, if we felt like it. If you're up for it. There's a lot of versions of this one, though. So. That's it. This has been Heavy Board. See you next time. It's a wet one.
Wipe it.
Paper won't come clean.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile.
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources. American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom,
Heavy.
I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.